Few things are for sure in this life, but this is. If we live for any substantial amount of time, we will encounter grief due to the loss of a loved one. Not something any of us ever want, and we all handle it differently. This podcast is to feature those who have done purposeful and meaningful things through their grief. These people featured on here are normal folks, just like you and me, who were thrust into a place they never wanted to be in their lives. A painful place. As they moved through their pain, they realized that something worthwhile, something for the greater good, could come out of the unthinkable. I'm sure that none of them would ever consider themselves to be a hero, but when I searched the definition of the word hero, I found this: a person who is admired or idolized for courage, outstanding achievements, or noble qualities. And that fit. And so it's my privilege to bring you the remarkable stories of these heroes in grief. Hi, everyone. This is Tom, your host for the Heroes in Grief podcast, and the response has been incredible so far, and I want to thank you for that. It's getting out to people, and they're letting us know that it's helping them, and that is what it's all about. I want to make you aware of a way that you can support this podcast without having to spend 1 cent, and that is through affiliate marketing. I've set up affiliate marketing for online shopping. If you do online shopping, then I have links to all the major retailers, most of them anyways, and I can provide them for you so that when you buy online through those links, you'll help support the podcast through the percentages that we get. It doesn't cost you anything more. You just shop like you regularly would on the sites that you love. It's very easy. All you have to do is shop. And that's it. Just let me know the links to the places that you want to shop at, and I will provide the affiliate links so that you can do it. If you want more information on this, you can go to heroesingrief.com. It takes you to the Linktree page where a video explains it in a little more detail. But you can always email me at tom@heroesingrief.com, and I can answer questions for you. But you can support the podcast that way, and it's very easy, very simple, and it doesn't cost you a cent. Isn't that great? Thank you. Now here's today's episode. I don't really do an intro or whatever, but why you contacted me about being on Heroes in Grief. Everyone, we're here with Hannah Ray, and you're in New Zealand, right?
I am.
Yeah, I was shocked at the time difference. I didn't realize that you're like 15 hours different than me.
Yeah, it's quite it's sometimes quite hard to get your head around.
Yeah.
Even for me, but you guys are a day behind.
Yeah.
Almost.
Yeah. It's interesting. Yeah. Well, anyways, good morning to you.
Yeah, thanks.
You're welcome. So yeah, I think initially you sent me an email with interest to be on Heroes in Grief. And so, yeah, I've checked out some of your stuff, but I don't go too deep into that because I'd like to hear from you what you're all about, what your story is. And, then we just kind of go from there, if you don't mind sharing.
Perfect. Yeah, I think it was when you first started, you were calling out for, seeking guests for the podcast. And I just all about sharing my experience and using that to help others, I suppose, because that is something that I had very little of in the way of, hope or inspiration or just seeing myself in someone else's story when I was going through my own experience. Yeah, my name is Hannah, and I am based in a tiny town in the South Island of New Zealand with a few lakes and like a few 100,000 square kilometers or square miles of bush and national park, like right on our doorstep. And yeah, I just love the outdoors. I'm my best self in the outdoors, and I just love moving through these landscapes and it brings me a lot of joy moving through those places and feeling strong in my body. And it's also nature's in the outdoors is where I did a lot of my, grieving and processing and healing too.
What was your grief story?
Well, so I have 3 people, definitely more than 3, but these were all kind of the first big losses in my life. And the first of those was my friend Caleb. So he thrived on being in the outdoors, any adventure, so enthusiastic, and that enthusiasm of his was so infectious, hilarious sense of humor, and just a really big, strong-hearted man. And he died in an accident in the mountains in October 2018. And kind of surrounding that time, my dad had been diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma earlier that year, and he went straight into treatment. We were riding that ride of treatment over those few months, and we'd just got the news. So the next step in the treatment was stem cell treatment, but we got the news that he wasn't healthy enough to even have a go at that. So doctors are like, well, they're basically telling you, like, you're waiting now and you're in limbo, which is just a really awful, horrible place for everyone. And yeah, so it was that at that moment. So I'm someone that typically, prior to all of this, you really reached out for help. I don't know if it's the same in North America, but especially here in New Zealand, I don't know whether it's a hangover from, the white ancestors, the colonialism, just making things happen. But yeah, it's just this DIY culture, like do it yourself. That's how I'd got through my whole life up to this point where I just turned 30. So yeah, it was a big deal for me to be reaching out to my friend Caleb, and I knew that he was one person that I felt like I could really rely on and trust. He was out of town at that time, but we planned to meet up the following week. And I was like, okay, like I can, it's still really awful and a horrible situation to be in, but knowing that I had that conversation with Caleb where I could unload what was going on for me and with Dad, and like how am I going to get through this? Caleb's accident was on 2 days before that meetup that we planned, and he was in a coma in ICU and then was taken off life support 4 days later. So it's kind of like thrown into this just whole just really turbulent time, kind of like the rug swept out from under me of my life. Basically, they were two of the people that I really relied on, and when Caleb, I needed him most, he was whisked away. And so Dad died a few months later, and then my granddad, his dad, a few months after that, which it just seems like heartbreaking. He was like, I can't do this anymore. So yeah, that's kind of the short-ish version of all of that, and that was 6-7 years ago.
So yeah, just horrible. I mean, in such a short period of time, naturally, and you didn't have time to grieve one, much less 3 in a row like that. And like you said, with not the support system around and things like that, you just kind of keep trying to truck on, right? And so yeah. And then so through that, as you go through that and everything, obviously some things happened that changed your approach to all of that. So what would you attribute that to?
The changing?
Yeah.
Do you mean? Wow, so much. It's hard to know where to start. I think like the biggest thing that changed for me is my perspective. Oh man, so much there. Like perspective and I guess view. Like it really challenged my beliefs and narratives around life and death was probably one big thing. But the other big thing that it changed was my relationship with my body and my nervous system, and how I tended to all of that, kind of leading up all through my type A personality, all up. My first decade was in a corporate career, just a really full, busy life, which I think is typical of a lot of young people. And I'd gotten into endurance and adventure sports, had a really amazing group of friends. I was doing some really cool things, had a great job, but just, on paper it all looked, really nice and lovely, and she's made it. But inside I was feeling that emptiness. I'd already been asking some of those big questions of what is this life about? And I'm almost 30 and I've got all these things, but I'm still not happy or feeling fulfilled. And so I was kind of in that place of depression and like a version of anxiety, edging into burnout, and just had no idea like what all that was doing to my body and my nervous system, how it was just living in that fight or flight state basically the whole time. So grief, it's almost like, and I'd be curious if this is the same for you, like I would never wish that upon anyone, but it's broken me open and made me a better person in so many ways.
Yeah, so you went through a soul-searching time, right?
Oh, yeah.
because you're gutted, basically. Yeah, you're right. You get broken open and everything is revealed, really, and especially to yourself, I think. So many things challenge you in thinking, as you think about those relationships, your relation to those relationships, and how that applies to you, and then with what you're dealing with, and wondering, how to do that, and all of that, you discovered so much about yourself. It makes sense that, there you are, opened up, like, okay, now what, right? And I guess when you take the good road, you start putting that into action. And so you've certainly done that.
Somehow, the best way
What was that? Sorry.
the best way we all know how, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So you started seeing some things that you could help yourself with initially, right? And then turning that into toward others.
Yeah. Are you wanting to know where that all started? How that all
Yeah.
started? Yeah. It really started early on through Caleb's death. He had just had such a big life, so many different things that he was involved in. So that was one of the beautiful things, is meeting all of the different people from different parts of his life that I might have heard about or had no idea about, and how they're just connected by this one awesome human, and found that made some fast friendships through that bond of our mutual friend, and having that community was definitely part of what a lot of them maybe had no idea about what Dad was going through as well, but at least there was an element of that community, or a sense of belonging somewhere, and talking, just being with each other, sitting with each other, just going around for an evening and watching a movie, that kind of thing, and not having to talk about it, or going for walks. Yeah, doing all those things socially outdoors as well. But it was really after Dad's death that I spoke with, went and sought, traditional counseling. And anyone that I spoke with, it's no fault of their own, but and maybe I don't know for sure, but I definitely got the sense that they'd either never been through a life-altering loss like this, or even at that age. And that's something that I do have come to realize, how important that is for younger people as well. Like, if you're not, there's so many parts of that, like, you're still figuring your life out, you might not have a permanent place to live, there's so much insecurity and instability anyway, that when something like that does happen, you don't really have anywhere to lean on. And then the other part that I never really felt from them was a level of grief literacy. And I trying to remember the timing of it, but one of the counselors I spoke with, she brought out the 5 stages of grief, and was like, well, I've never really been feeling any of those, like none of them fit at all. And yeah, it wasn't until a few weeks later I was like, what is going on here? And that's when, and I'm sure you've spoken about that before, and through working with David Kessler as well, is they're not those. That's not a model that's designed for us,
Right.
for the people left, those of us left behind grieving. So, and all of the things that I was doing to help myself, like trying to get enough sleep, drinking enough water, eating proper food, like seeing people, journaling, that was all she could offer me. And so she's like, well, there's not much else that I can help you with. And I was like, but I want to be doing, that type A personality character type play into this. But and there are so many things that we can be doing to support ourselves. And so it's kind of through that experience, and just, there wasn't anyone in my, definitely would have been people on the internet, but not anyone within my kind of sphere or extended network that I felt like, oh, like I can go to this person and get the support that I need, or maybe point me in the right direction. And so that's, I kind of made a contract with myself that if or when I got to the point where I felt like I was, done with like the being under the water of grief, and kind of, not floating along easily, but having my head above water, and kind of have that really good understanding of how to manage and navigate it and move through it. I was like, I want to be that person for other people. And that's how I got started in grief coaching. And I actually did share, once I got to a point where I was comfortable with that, I did share bits and pieces about my journey and what it was like. And so just by putting that out on, I think, like a blog or social media, I did kind of invite those connections even before I had, set out, out forth on that coaching journey for a start. And I did have people, friends coming to me like, my mum died a few months ago, or how do I support this person? And I was like, man, there is a real need for this.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's kind of the encouragement that I needed to be like, this is scary and I don't see anyone here who is doing it, but it's obviously, a place of support that's needed.
Yeah, what a common story. Unfortunately, it is. It's that, sometimes the traditional ways, traditional therapists, things like that, they don't have the background. It's not required here in the States to have grief training. It's getting better, but that's not a
That's
required
interesting. I
thing,
didn't know.
which
Yeah.
seems absurd, of
Wow.
course. Yeah. So, and you have a wonderful story for those who, and you've taken a hard road. So, but unfortunately, a lot of folks end up in that situation. And so they don't know where to reach out to, or they don't know that there's all these resources out there now and that type of thing. So they get through it themselves and they start breaking through and then discovering actually that they, usually this leads to the desire to help others and share those things that you've learned. And you came along a great path with that to become that peer-to-peer support person. And now you have coaching training and things like that. But, the peer-to-peer situation can be more effective for some people at times because of that. They can relate. And in some way that, a traditional therapist that doesn't have the background can't, and so, it's encouraging for others, I think, to hear. I hear so many times in this podcast, that people, they've done the stories, whatever, and usually they've tapped into the resources and that's how they discovered things where you kind of isolated, just, with your life, with the way it is and where you live, maybe isolated from that. And so I commend you really for moving forward through that. And, like you said, at your age too, that's, unfortunately a lot of young people now don't have the determination, the desire, or some don't, I should say, not a lot, but I mean, there's those. And so you're a good example for that. And, it's like I said, it's hard. You went through a hard road, and it's not like say to everybody, "Hey, take this road," because
Yeah.
there's a lot of other ways. But yeah, so there's so many resources out there that people just don't know about, and so it's nice that yourself, whatever we're doing is just trying to get all this out there for folks that they can, when they're swimming out there, like you said, with their head above water, they can grab onto one of these things and find some help.
And I think definitely for grief also, and then that's how I started out in my coaching practice. And then as I was just through my network, and I was kind of attracting people who had been through like empty nesting or relationship breakdowns, or a big injury that would stop them doing the ways that they'd normally cope with hard things or their emotions. And so that's when I started broadening out into this bigger definition of resilience. So, anything that will help us get through hard things, really. And I've just totally lost my train of thought getting to the end of the
Join the
week.
crowd.
Yeah, I was going somewhere with that. I swear it'll come back. Yeah.
Well, grief and loss. I always say now, and when I post things, it's always grief and loss because so similar what you go through, no matter what kind of loss, and you frequently experience grief from different losses. So it doesn't have to be a death every time. It's a loss of independence, loss of, whatever it may be. And the trajectory is often similar. So, and I think that grief, when you experience a death and things, it's, maybe the most monumental of experience that way. So it immediately like takes you to the top of the qualification level, of being able to help others and identify. And then you infuse this into your resilience side, for you work primarily with women, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
do you find that a lot of them? Because I don't know, here in the States, I think it's frequent that, people in general, but women for sure, a lot of them don't feel, maybe it's, what the media displays, all these different things, they don't feel adequate in some way. And so they feel less, or whatever about themselves. And so you took the strength you've gotten through this and then you put that into your work that way. Is that as far as the resilient side?
Yeah. kind of what you're speaking to about women there is what I see is, part of it is in, our nature and biology, but often to our detriment is like, I'm not worthy of spending that time and money on, we're always putting that attention somewhere else, whether it's, family or community, caring for older parents or, anything. And it's often that, that we hear about self-care a lot, but, truly looking after yourself, and especially in grief, so that you can, looking after yourself, filling your own cup as much as you can before, because without that, you're not going to be able to, it's not going to be a sustainable thing to be able to support everyone else around you through, a grief or a loss. And what I was going to say before has swung back into my brain. It is like, whenever we meet something hard, I don't know what it's like where you are, but definitely hear I don't know what it is, like if someone maybe shares a little bit about what's going on to someone, the kind of instinct is to say, oh, maybe you should talk to someone or like go seek professional help. And by that, they usually mean like talk to a counselor or therapist. But, through my own learning, and the more I speak with others, and learning through lived and learned wisdom, is that.
Hello, friends. I just wanted to take a brief break here in the podcast to make you aware of a very exciting partnership that Heroes in Grief has just formed, and that is with Get Griefy Magazine. I'm going to let their founder and editor-in-chief, Kara Sanchez, tell you all about it.
Hey, Heroes in Grief listeners. Life after loss isn't easy, but it can be colorful and full of possibilities. Meet Get Griefy Magazine, a vibrant resource filled with inspiring stories of life after loss, expert advice, and voices from everyday grievers and thought leaders. Together, they're here to help guide you toward the side of life that's left to be lived fully and authentically. Dive into Get Griefy for free on Issue or snag a print copy on Amazon. Connect with us on Instagram at Get Griefy Magazine or visit getgriefymagazine.com to explore, join our thriving small business collective, or discover advertising opportunities. Let's embrace life after loss, boldly and together.
And now back to our episode.
That's great. That is a great option, but it's only one of so many. Mm-hmm. Like maybe you do need to go talk to a counselor, and I have my own therapist that I meet with regularly. So like, there's no way, like, it definitely has a time and place. I'm not at all throwing out talk therapy, but maybe you need to go for a walk with a friend, or maybe you need to go to a massage or get some kind of body work. And for me, it was yoga and getting into having energy work done on me. That, because especially in those early days, you try and ask me to articulate what was going on in my brain. I was like, I can't describe to you. I can't tell you what's happening. And it was through my body that gave me the access to really process and heal and start to move through a lot of that. And one fun fact that I've learned really early on in my study was, we hear a lot about this vagus nerve that connects our brain and our vital organs. And that's a two-way highway of all this information. But 80% of that information is going from our body to our brain. And I think just that alone tells you everything that you need to know about how important the body is in grief and loss, or just in life.
And you experience physiological things in grief that you don't at any other time. So that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So you're living under the simple adage that you have to feel good about yourself before you're going to be good for others.
Very simply.
Yeah. And that's the whole body, the whole mind, the whole spirit, everything.
Yeah. I talk about it as whole being, well-being. With your mind, your body, your emotional, your mental, your relationships. Environmentalism, spaces that you move through, and then the soul and spiritual as well.
I just wanted to say too,
and obviously it's not pretty perfect. it's tending to all of those.
Yeah, work in progress. We all are. Yeah, I was going to say, I'm just jealous of you and where you live. I would love to see it and be out there amongst that. I'm not in a bad spot. I'm in Niagara Falls, New York. So we have an incredible natural
wow.
wonder here, of course, but
Yeah.
it's very nice. And when you say New York to people who don't live here, everybody thinks New York City, but we're 500 miles from New York City. So actually the areas around the rest of New York State are rural and beautiful and a lot of very nice areas. So, but yeah,
I've heard,
seen
yeah.
some scenes of New Zealand. It's gorgeous for sure. Yeah. So
Mm-hmm.
what kind of things do you do in your work?
Well, there's a few branches to it. Were you interested in anything specifically or just happy to
No, this
let us
is
chat?
your commercial. So you take it where you want it to go.
So I do also run my own podcast called Rewild You, and that is having those, conversations like this, but more broadly around those, those other types of losses or turning points that really change people. That might be a job or changing career, or there have been quite a few, like cancer journeys, and then a few grief stories in there, but really just an excuse to talk to people that I want to talk to that I find really interesting.
That's all good.
Yeah, we talk about creativity, and there's definitely a hearty dose of adventure and the outdoors in there as well. Yeah, really just in a way giving people access to just these types of conversations where you're hearing someone, whether you know them or not, but there have been a few more, well-known in New Zealand people that I've interviewed, and I think just hearing from all types of different people about, it's easy to put people on a pedestal, or even we get so isolated in our own experience and be like, oh, no one's going to really, and I was in this boat too, that's why I could describe it with such clarity. It's like, no one's going to understand what I'm going through. Like, I've made this own, can I swear on this?
Yeah.
I've made this own shitstorm of my life. Like, I'm going to sort it out.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to get help from anyone else. And it is just like over time hearing those stories from other people about, like they actually are going through something really similar. Here's how they're getting through it. And even if it is, there's something from like the smaller day-to-day challenges to the big life-changing events, there's always inspiration and hope for just a different way to do things, or ideas, or even just that motivation to be like, okay, like I can leave the house today.
Yeah.
Like simple as that. So yeah, the podcast is part of it. And then, I at the moment doing one-on-one resilience coaching, and I take people through the Reclaim framework, which is a framework that came out of my own experience, and then built on that through the training that I've done. And that is more, because all of us come at this with such a unique context, we're all so different. And while there are similar threads and connections, we all have like a different lens. So my goal was never to be like, do this, this, and this, and you'll feel like yourself again. It's more included in the framework is like connecting with your values, learning about emotional intelligence, and understanding that for yourself mentally and in your body. It's learning about our nervous system. And kind of all of it is knowledge, but all with ways that you can apply it and tailor it to like each individual, like yourself. And we have we have an online curriculum as well as one-on-one sessions to really help that land. And so it's kind of a roadmap, but it's really a roadmap to go back to yourself, connecting with like who you are, what's important to you, your inner strengths, and helping someone use all of that to find their own way. Because we all know ourselves best, ultimately.
So guidance to self-discovery, really, right?
Yeah. And I like through my 20s, I did spend a lot of time in the self-development, that personal growth type of sphere, which was great. But this is a little bit different. It has some themes of that, but a wee bit softer, I'd say, more inwards focused.
Do you do it only in person or online or both?
All online, just because of the nature of where I live. Yeah.
One of the great wonders now that we have this ability, right, to reach out to the world. So that's great. I agree with you on the stories for sure. There's inspiration in there somewhere in everybody's story. And so that's very useful for sure. So I see you got, you do have a Substack now too, right, for your blog or whatever it was.
I do.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, thank
Yeah,
you.
and I want to tell everybody too, you did mention the podcast, but it's Rewild. So it's not real wild, it's Rewild. Rewild You, right?
Yeah.
Rewild You. There we go.
It's a bit of a
Yeah.
mouthful. And I think the accents, it probably misses. I miss them syllables.
No, but do you mean it by like you're rewilding yourself? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, we saw those examples in COVID times when we were stuck in place, and we saw these, sometimes urban and sometimes other areas, really just nature was taking back over. And I think about that in our internal worlds as well. Like the person I was when I was 30, I wasn't born like that. There are all these, experiences, some good, some not so helpful, that built who I was. We had, what society or my community was telling me about what I should do, should be doing this. And in kind of all of that, like chasing all of those external things, I'd really lost myself. I know that sounds so cliche, but it really is about bringing that fullness of nature and your wild self. And it's also connecting with, I don't like prescribe this or push this on people, but I think people who also enjoy the outdoors and nature are drawn to my work because it's not prescribed, but it's kind of infused throughout all of it. So yeah, rewilding, connecting with just that really, whole natural organic self.
And adventurous.
And adventurous. Sometimes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can have a fulfilled life. You really can. Everybody can.
Mm.
In the midst of whatever you may be in. I'm convinced of that.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it's perspective at times. Unfortunately, I know some people are in some very, very horrible situations. And so, but there's light for everybody there in some regard, I think.
It's really, I'd be interested to hear how you kind of navigate this too, because like right now I just have like normal challenges. And while all this, it just feels so easy now to talk about this as though it was kind of like I'm obviously a different person because all of this happened. I'm a product of all of that. But in a way, I'm kind of outside of that, the acute, gritty part of that experience now. So it might feel to someone quite, I don't know, jarring, or like it's easy for you to say because you're not in it anymore. And I remember for me that just, making a little deal with myself, or like and people talk about gratitude as well. And I really found that a really tough one to swallow early on. Like, think of what you're still thankful for. And I was like, yeah, I know it's there, but that kind of dismisses all that ache, that heartache that I'm feeling at the moment. So I found a way to reframe it. And for me, that was, what is helping me get out of bed today? Or what is helping me get through to the end of this day? And that felt like a much more neutral way to approach gratitude, I suppose.
Yeah.
And often it was like, it kind of still is the same things in a way, like sunshine, coffee, a hot shower.
All good. I wonder, because since my son's passing a couple of years ago, I've searched into the metaphysical world and meditating. I believe that we are part of the collective consciousness, this type of thing. So there's a lot to all of that, but it's changed my perspective on existence. And I wonder how that's going to be when the challenge comes. I've wondered if I have a terminal illness or something like that, where am I going to stand with all of that? I believe that it's going to be in place and that I'm going to rely on that and trust that, because I do now. And it's taken me through my intense grief and everything else. So that's where mine comes from. And so, that's going to take a different form for everybody, I think. And it's difficult, because I wonder, when we're talking to those who are in circumstances that we don't understand, or certainly don't want in our lives, do they see things that way, or can they see things that way? I wonder that, and it's a learning process. It's, I'll have to see where that experience takes me. if that time comes, if something happens like that. I honestly have
Mm,
not experienced a very difficult grief situation since. So, that's going to change and my reaction to that will be different now and everything. So I don't know. We'll have to see. It's nothing I can say
mm,
for sure. I know what I believe now. I certainly do. I don't fear death. I don't fear life. So, sometimes I put it into practice in other ways. Like I talk about it all the time with the nature of the world, and what's going on in the world and, us here in the States, politics, it's ridiculous. People can get very stressed out on whatever side. And I watch the news a lot and digest it and just sit there. I have my views, certainly my way of thinking and what I believe in. And if it's not going that way or it's stressed in some way, I tend to just go back to that, what I just talked about internally and say, all of this really doesn't matter. That matters what my internal side believes. And that's more important. And that supersedes all of that. And I do that. So I'm hoping that it goes into practice in the right way if a very troublesome time came.
yeah, that's interesting that you say that because I was actually just thinking about that this morning with my own probably similar views on consciousness and energy and all of that. Because what I was going through when I, 30, 31, I didn't have that bigger perspective. I kind of spoke about that feeling of being really isolated and in my own bubble. That was kind of like, sounds really kind of a bit bananas to say, but that was kind of like my universe, like very young view, I suppose. And so it was like everything that I did influenced all of that. That's maybe not explain it the best way, but like it didn't have that bigger context or worldview of all of that that's held in infinite universal consciousness or divine energy or whatever you want to call it. Yeah, as you say, it would be interesting to not that I want to invite that at all.
No.
A challenge within that bigger view, whether that would have been different, never know.
Yeah.
And it also kind of links in with early on, like when I did go out looking for stories, but in the forms of books. And there's at that stage, we've kind of in that like 5 or 6 years had this just wave of like grief memoirs and grief books, which is amazing. But even that time, it was still pretty early on, and there wasn't that diversity in stories. Most of the books that I found were like mostly stories of women 50 plus. Like, yes, there are elements of that were helpful to me as a like 20, 30-year-old. There's a whole lot of that context that does not fit. And I couldn't place it. I was like, yes, this is all good. And like, it's on the top, like listicles of grief books we should be reading. But like, why doesn't that land for me? And it did take a while to be like, well, I'm kind of having an existential moment before all this anyway. I didn't actually have a permanent living situation, like renting, flatting, I don't know, we call it house sharing. I was in a job that I knew wouldn't be, or even a career that wouldn't be a longer term thing. I didn't have a partner. My support system was scattered across, the South Island of New Zealand. It's just very different too. It doesn't make it better or worse. I'm not saying that. It's just different. It's hard to relate to someone who has had 50 years with a person, or they have an established family and community and more of that connection of belonging to lean on.
Yeah.
So yeah, as I get older, it'll be interesting to see how those factors maybe come into play to help hold me.
Yeah. It's an ever evolving thing, but I love the fact that you're very open, I guess is the only word to use for the demographic you're talking about, because I think there's a lot of avoidance at times in that age group and things. The younger, just kind of truck on, like you said. And, it's nice to have someone like you there that they can identify with in some way, and be able to share in that way and understanding. And so it's great to hear. And again, I'm very refreshed by your whole approach and story and everything, because, I've done this now for over a year. I've had some high level people on, and sometimes and I don't mean this in a bad way, but sometimes there's the grief story, boom, I decided I wanted to help people, and boom, here I am, and I'm doing these great things. And so it's never that cut and dry, never. And so it's nice to hear you just saying, look at this is, it's a struggle. It's a struggle. But on the flip side, your heart has changed like all of us. And this is why we're doing what we're doing, is that our heart changes through our experience. And they say, if I can relieve this in any way for anybody else, then that helps me too, to make sense of whatever the case is, and so, you're putting it into action in the context of who you are, and that's great representation of what you do for others. So is there anything that maybe we didn't cover that you'd like to talk about?
Maybe just coming back to if someone is really in it right now, and maybe they're like, yes, I'd love to get to that point that you guys are in sometime, but right now that's so not achievable. It might feel like you're broken, but you're not. It's just a really shitty, awful situation, but it does not mean that you're broken. You're allowed to laugh. I know I felt this as well. Like, I can't have anyone catch me laughing because then they'll judge me for not grieving properly. And I mean, there's so much wrong with that. And I did it too. So, and I imagine you would have come across this as well, that oscillation model of grieving, bereavement research, being deep in that grief and really feeling that, and then oscillating, shifting back into something more neutral, or even a form of pleasure or joy or smiling. It's kind of our replacement for the 5 stages model, I suppose, putting it really simple. So yeah, I think that's probably the 2 most important things. I'd love to leave on who's really in it.
Those other things can be misconstrued, just get real. Awesome, Hannah. Thank you. I appreciate you contacting me and then coming on and everything. And of course, all your information is going to be in the show notes and everything, so people can contact you there and get a hold of you. And I encourage them all to go to your podcast and subscribe there. And you've got free resources available on your site and everything for folks. So that site, I will spell it out for you right now. It's REWILD, Rewild You, YOU, HQ.co. Okay. So that's how you can find it. RewildYouHQ.com. And so I'll tell everyone to go there.
Thanks so much. And thanks so much, Tom, for all the work that you're doing as well, and following those nudges of intuition or instruction to go out and put this podcast and have these conversations out in the world as well. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoy the casual vibe, and it's just been such a nourishing and grounding conversation.
Thank you. That's the way I want it to be. So I appreciate that very much. All right. Thank you. Take care.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to the Heroes in Grief podcast. If you'd like access to any of the links that we discussed in today's show, you can find them in the show notes. There's also a link there to support the podcast if you care to. And there is an email link for me there. I'd love to hear from you and your ideas about the show or what you thought about the show. You really can help out this podcast to get to more people if you subscribe, rate, or review it in whichever way your platform provides. Each week, Heroes in Grief is released on Sunday, so look for new episodes there. Thank you again for listening to Heroes in Grief.